All right, we're back with some more factoring, and this is where we're going to take a trinomial. Factoring trinomials means three terms, and we are going to factor that into two binomials. And again, remember what we did from last time is to make sure that if we can take anything out of all three terms, we better do that first. Always factor out the greatest common factor first. All right, so number one, there's nothing that's in common between all three, so we can go right to it. So what you want to do is just go ahead and make your two parentheses. We're going to factor in two binomials. And the only way to get an x squared is if we just do x and x. All right, and then the one thing we have to do is figure out, okay, what two numbers multiply to 16? That's the end term. But then they have to add together to be the middle term, which is 10. So thinking of two numbers that multiply to 16 but add to 10, that would be a positive 8 and a positive 2. There we go, and that's factored. Okay. All right, let's try number two. Again, we're going to factor into two binomials, and we check to see if there's anything that goes in all three terms. Nope. To get the x squared, we're going to go x and x. And then we think, what multiplies to 40 but adds to 14? Multiplies to 40, adds to 14, looks like a 10 and a 4 would work there. And sometimes, you just got to try something, see what works. Write them out, see what happens. Put it on the back porch, see if the cat licks it up. You know what I'm talking about. All right, so let's try number three once again. We're going to go here where you have x and x. There we go. And we have to think of two numbers that multiply to 20 but add to 9. I think what would work there is we'd go 5 and 4. 5 and 4 would work, yeah. Okay. All right, now this one's going to be a little different now because these were all positives here before. We're still going to factor with the x and the x. That gives us the x squared. But now, little twist, we have to find two numbers that multiply to positive 2 but add to negative 3. Ooh, well, the only way that's going to work is if we do a negative 2 and a negative 1. Notice how those do multiply to 2, and then when you add them, it adds to negative 3. It's a little trickier when we start throwing some negatives in there. Much like when we do number 5 here, we have the x and the x. All right, what multiplies to negative 24? Well, the only way you can get a negative product is if one's positive and one's negative. So a little tricky. Now, these have to multiply to negative 24. So think of factors of 24, that when you add them together, it's negative 5. Now, remember, one of these is positive and the other is negative. And if that b term, if that number in front of the x is negative, that means the higher number has to be negative. So I think what would happen here is I'm going to try a negative 8 and a positive 3. Aha, yeah, 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. And when you add those, you do get negative 5. That's where you're just going to have to try to put some in, see if it works. Like I said, slap it on the wall, see if it sticks. All right, here we go. Let's try the number 6 here. We've got x and x. There we go. Now, again, you're going to multiply to be negative, so one's positive and one's negative. You got to multiply to 28, negative 28. And then when you add them, it's negative 3. So the bigger one has to be the negative. So I think if we go negative 7 and positive 4, that should work. Ha, ha, ha. All right. Well, now, 7 and 8, here's where we get into, oh my goodness, okay. We always want it to be x squared. So let's take the 2 out of everything. And let's see what happens there. If I take a 2 out, I have x squared plus 8x plus 16. All right, so now when I factor that, I have the 2. Now let's see, we got these. We have the x and the x. Now what two numbers multiply to 16 but add to 8? It's going to be 4 and 4, isn't it? All right, and then number 8 there, we can take an x out of that. We'd have an x squared plus 10x plus 16. So now we have the x. Now we write our two binomials. And we have x and x. And what two numbers multiply to 16 but add to 10? That must be 8 and 2, huh? All right. So try those. Now, once again, you can always kind of check to see if you're right, because if you FOIL it, in other words, you take the first, you get an x squared. Then when you take x times 2, you get 2x. And let's see, then when you go 8 times x, you get 8x. And then when you go 8 times 2, you get 16. Make sure that that equals what you start. So you can always check it. It's just kind of working forwards and backwards there. All right, well, there's some practice with factoring trinomials, kind of a big thing as we move forward here of something that we're going to want to do, get really good at that factoring. And the only way to do it is by doing lots of them. There's a reason that I'm an expert. I've done a million of them. So